Colleagues, thank you for joining. We'll just wait 1 more minute or so for everyone to join us, and then we will start the webinar. Okay, I'm going to kick us off. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined. A very warm welcome to all of you to this timely webinar on addressing knowledge asymmetries. My name is Nicola Tennyson, and I'm joined behind the scene by Lynn Burgess from EvalPartners. The purpose of today's session is to provide the audience with a bit of an overview and also some of the expectations for this very special edition planned for the African Evaluation Journal in memory of the late Dr. Sulley Gariba. So, Lynn, if you can go to the next slide. On the agenda, we first have Grace Igueta, who is a Senior Evaluation Officer with the United Nations World Food Programme. She will provide a bit of background as to how this initiative was conceptualized and what was the thinking behind it. Then we hand over to Dr. Mark Abrams to give us more information about this specific issue planned for the journal. And Mark will also chair the panel and will introduce our 4 esteemed panelists in due course. And at the end of the session, we hope to, for the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes, we hope to, we'll open the floor for commentary and reflections and questions. And please feel free to, in the meantime, add your thoughts or your questions in the chat box. Tell us where you are from as the event proceeds. I'm sure many members of the audience have known Sulley personally and would also have some reflections on as to how this issue could capture his vision and his legacy. We are recording the session for note-keeping purposes, and although today's webinar is in English, the journal will accept contributions in English and in French. So with that, I will now hand over to Grace.
Thank you, Nicola, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, colleagues, friends, wherever you are joining us from. So as Nicola mentioned, sorry, I switched on my camera, I forgot. Yes. So as Nicola mentioned,
did you take her over to the archives? Okay, so you go to the archives. I should be ready in the next. This will be finished in about an hour. Okay.
Someone has their camera, their mic open. Can you please close your mic?
Yes, please. So, okay, thank you. So as I was mentioning, rather as Nicola has introduced me, my name is Grace. I work at the Office of Evaluation of the World Food Programme in Rome as a Senior Evaluation Officer. And I just wanted to start by reminding us that if you read about Sulley Gariba and what he stood for, he understood evaluation was not an end in itself, but it was a means to something. So if you look at his career, which was very wide and varied, he did many things, held many positions, and his life was captured beautifully by Professor Edward Jackson, and with message here. But what stands across is that he realized that evaluation is powerful and can be used to actually break knowledge asymmetries and be used for the good of citizens and good of the people. And so when he passed away, those of us that knew him, or the organizations and institutions that knew him, and came together and thought, what is it that we could do that could actually first appreciate what he did for the evaluation as a profession, as an area of practice, but also what he did in other aspects, including being a politician and therefore being to speak for people, being a diplomat, being able to represent his own country, and working in philanthropy. I think you worked with MasterCard. And so we worked with the EvalPartners and came up with the idea of the lectures. So if you can go to the next slide. So we say we want to do something that will not be a one-off. And this is important to note, that we can relive through the ideas that it stood for in ways that would contribute to learning across regions. Because if you look at his life, he worked locally in Ghana, where he's coming from. He worked regionally in Africa. If you look at the document he was holding in that picture, that's the African peer review mechanism, which we know is an homegrown approach to evaluation in Africa context. He worked in Canada. He was part of ideas. So he had this global approach to his own work in his life. So it wasn't something that had the same sense that could work locally, would be relevant internationally, regionally. So we decided to come up with a series of lectures, supported by World Food Program, through EvalPartners, because it's a network of voluntary organizations, evaluation professional organizations. And the idea was, starting from Africa, where Sulley was from, during each conference, we look at that region and do a research on what evaluation looks like and means in that region, and prepare a paper, and then that will be presented either as a lecture or as a panel during the conference. And after that, that work will be documented. So we already did that last year during the AFREA conference that was online due to COVID. We did that in Latin America, in Ecuador, in November last year. And this year we are working on 2 lectures, one in Asia and Pacific in December in Manila. And we're hoping to have another one in Egypt, in the MENA, in the MENA region, through EvalMENA. And once we have those 4 lectures, then the idea now, discussing with Mark and the other colleagues, we sat and thought, what is coming out of these lectures is it's rich learning and cross-regional, cross-cultural learning. Why don't we take that and have a special issue of African Evaluation Journal? And this is where we arrived at, and this is why we are here today. And if you look at the issue, the call for papers that went out, the title was inspired by Professor Jackson's message, because it captured Sulley Gariba's life beautifully. So that's why we're here. We're working on the 2 lectures are remaining, and we wanted this day to discuss what the issue is about and what is expected. And Mark is the expert in this area. And we're really, really looking for content that will enhance this cross-regional learning, cultural learning, so that we can continue this beautiful legacy of Sulley Gariba. So with that, I turn back to Nicola so we can proceed with the rest of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you very much for the background and the context that you provided. I will now give the floor to Mark Abrams. He is a senior consultant with Southern Hemisphere, a development agency based in Cape Town, South Africa. Mark is also the editor-in-chief of the African Evaluation Journal, and he's done significant work for the journal over the last 10 years. The African Evaluation Journal is a publication of AFREA, the African Evaluation Association. So Mark will also chair the panel and introduce our panelists. So from here onwards in Mark's capable hands. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, all the participants, for joining us today. As Nicola said, I will introduce the panelists a bit later. But for now, I have the pleasure of just sharing some pictures that we've collected. And I know some of you, as Nicola said, knew Sulley much better than we did, but we knew him. And now we're going to claim that part, the bit that we knew of him, the bit we shared with him. The pictures you have in front of you shows the first one. especially, Sulley not as the academic or the orator or the speaker, but as a family man. First of all, when we go our separate ways, when we on our own, we go back to what we know and love, and that is our family. And Sulley was definitely that. I met his wife a while ago, and some of her family members, but he was definitely a family man, and that's where we go to. The second picture there shows him a person young at heart, always young at heart, always jovial, always pleasant, always looking forward. So he was, for us, young at heart. And then he was the scholar. He was the PhD graduate. He was a scholar in that sense. And then one picture we have there, I don't know, I must admit, him as a cook at all. I don't know his culinary skills. I don't claim to know, but that picture shows me that his love for sharing, whether it's through cooking, but sharing food, and the food that I got from him was not maybe the physical food, the chicken or whatever that is in that pot there, but it was more the kind of knowledge and essence and passion about evaluation and development, and that's what he shared with us in abundance. And then people who are part of this webinar will recognize themselves at the various conferences across the globe in various contexts, where Sulley not only was invited as most of the time as keynote speaker, but as a panel member of something that's significant on the day. And that is how we knew him. Next slide, please. Now, from the previous slide to this one, you will recognize, you will have identified, you will have seen the beautiful clothes that he always wore. Very proudly West African, Ghanaian clothing and dress, and it's a proud to say who he was and his identity. He shared, as I said, he shared the platforms with many leaders in evaluation. The leaders can identify themselves, but as part of those leadership, he forged forward with that smile. I mean, you can see the smile in these pictures. And the smile is not only welcoming, but it's embracing and identifying and almost welcoming whoever he's with on the panel in the picture, and making the company part of who he was and who he is, and he remains to be. And I end off this kind of pictorial, if you want to call it that, with the next slide. Thank you. This was the last time that I formally engaged with Sulley at the 9th Africa Conference in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire, where on this particular picture you have in front of you is he was a panel member that he shared with well-known evaluators and evaluation experts and academics. He shared the platform there. But significant for those who were at that conference, he was part of a presidential strand on the journal, where we discussed the journal, and we asked him to be our critical friend, our critical commentator about the achievements of the journal. And my colleagues, who's also part of the panel, Florence and Mikel, shared the achievements of the journal, and we asked him to comment on that. And the first thing he said about the journal was that he wasn't the correct person to be the critical partner, because he was so supportive of the journal and he knew the role of the journal in the evaluation and development context. However, he said for the journal to be successful, we had to be very critical about the canons we were using. If you go to the next slide, I will talk more to that. So yeah, during our dynamic engagement with him there, and then I want those who were there to think back to what he said. He said we had to be very critical of the stuff that we took for granted, the knowledge that we enjoyed and imbued and used, that we had to be using those canons, as I call them, the kind of philosophies that we've imbued and embedded in our practices, that we turn them upside down and look at them more critically and start using them in ways that's more useful and more friendly to the local context. It was very important, he said, that the journal be responsive to what was happening on the day and the immediate needs of what people were asking for. So he wanted a responsive journal, something that could respond to, engage, and not be aloof to what is needed in practice, what is needed by the professionals, but something that was engaged. And more importantly, and that was the last thing he left with us during that session was the journal needs to be forward-looking, not just for the present, not just about the past, but where it's going, to provide that kind of information and leadership and lessons for the future, so that those coming can build on something that's solid, something that's has foundation, something that has understanding, something that can be shared with everybody. So for us, for me, as part of the journal, that is what we're using this opportunity for. This edition of the journal, to build on those building blocks, to add to the lessons and knowledge that we have, to go forward and make something that Sulley wanted the journal to be. So we will use this edition as a space and place for, yes, scholarly articles, and we make no apologies for the scholarly aspect of that, because Sulley was a thinker, he was a thought leader, he was something that interrogated concepts, he conceptualized things, and that is the level of depth we want our contributors to go to, is to think deeply about their practice, to think deeply about the consequences of those practices, and to think deeply about what we can learn from those exercises. Yes, we will entertain the concepts used there: made in Africa evaluation, transformative evaluation, indigenous evaluation, participatory evaluation, development evaluation, and many, many, many more. But what we want from those things is the unpacking of that makes sense, the unpacking of that links to the past, that links to the future, and that is what you want. We believe that some sense of what's generally called evaluative thinking is going to be required from participants who want to contribute to this edition. And for people who want to contribute, and I must share the joyous news that we have had several submissions so far, those talking to the evaluation principles of the African evaluation principles, and some work that people have been doing in the last couple of months or so. Then we welcome those kind of contributions. But always we want authors, writers, to think and look at issues from multiple perspectives, not just one perspective. This image that's on there, it could be us. And I asked the question, are we dancing together in celebration, or are we combating each other in competition? That there are always perspectives there. And when we unravel the concepts that we will use, these lessons that we will share with others, the dictates, the new concepts that we will come up with, I think we need to be creative about that and show that on the other side of the coin, there's also something that we can learn from. There's one thing that Professor Edward Jackson is part of this audience today, and again, we thank him for his words. Part of his obituary to Sulley Gariba was that Sulley said Canada was his second home. Now, that for me was not an oxymoron, it was such an important message that he was sharing there. Somebody from West Africa, Ghana, saying Canada is his second home. Somebody who highlighted the differences between North and South. Somebody who said how the North exploited the South. Somebody who mentioned that all the time, could go beyond that and recognize that the South can also teach the North, and he would teach the North so many things. And that is our task, I guess, as authors, as academics, as scholars, as practitioners, to show how we in Africa can share the knowledge that we have in a big way. And I think we must use this opportunity as authors to share our knowledge. Now, we made the invitation for papers very, very broad. And we don't expect any of these papers to mention Sulley Gariba's name once. It would be nice if they mentioned him all the time, but what we want from the papers is the essence of what he shared, the leadership he shared, the scholarly thoughtfulness that he shared. That is the essence that we want in the paper. So when you interrogate the concepts that you will share, the knowledge that you will put on the table, is know that it was done with deep thought, with the kind of level of energy that he had, with the youthfulness that he came with at things, and also knowing that as individuals and as a society, we are so diverse, but we're so rich. We are so different, but we have so much to share, and we have so much in common as well. And we'll interrogate some of those things as part of our thinking and contributing to this particular journal. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to write about. I've asked some of our panel members, if you go to the next slide, to share some of the information, but just as from some of the details we want initially until 15th of September, abstract to give us an idea of what you're going to share, so that we can assist in making sure that the final manuscript speaks to the theme. That's all we want for that. The full papers by 23rd of October. Now we intend trying to go through the review process through November, December days, and we know that people are not available sometimes during that time. So if you don't have time to write an article, to make a submission, we also ask you that you become a reviewer for this edition. You help us think through some of the papers that we submitted. So please send your ability to review, your willingness to review, also to the email address on this slide there. Okay, there we have. Or you can enter them in the chat box as said there, and we'll make contact with you to get your details. But please, we need more detail. The next slide will identify the panel that we will use now, and you can ask and think about questions later. Now I'm going to do this individually. The first panelist will be Florence Etta, who's my colleague and fellow editor. Florence is a global evaluation practitioner, a thinker, somebody I've known for a number of years. She served as the chair of the UN Women Global Evaluation Advisory Committee between 2017 and 2019. She was a past president of AFRIA as well. She's a founder member of AGDEN. She's still interim chair of that organization. She's an active member of 3 contemporary EvalPartners evaluation networks, and very, very many more. It's always a pleasure to engage with Florence. And for this particular session, I'm going to ask Florence, who came up with an idea about something, or a method and an approach to use when writing about the issues and concerns that Sulley would put forward. And this is the oral history. She came across the notion of an oral history. Now I'm going to ask Florence. Florence, tell us, the audience here, how oral history can be used to capture, number one, what Sulley stood for, and also how oral history as a methodology is synergized with the kind of African, made in Africa evaluation that we want to promote. So a 2-pronged question there. What is your understanding of oral history as a methodology in relation to made in Africa evaluation, and how would that energize and generate information and knowledge about what Sulley Gariba stood for? Florence, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Mark. I suppose and believe and hope that you can all hear me okay. Just give me a minute. Let me start my video. Great. Again, thanks, Mark, and welcome everybody to this preparatory webinar for your great contributions to this journal volume that we're making in memory of our dear friend, colleague, mentor, pioneer, Sulley Gariba. Thank you, Mark, for asking the story about the question about oral history. I don't have the slide to share. If anybody else has a slide of a few thoughts I had put together, I'd be happy for that to be shared, just so people can follow through on my thoughts. Great, thank you very much. Sulley Gariba, as you all well know, if you're familiar with the history to now about what we're trying to do here, is capture his thoughts. I knew Sulley, I met Sulley almost 20 years ago. And you can't, the first thing you come away with when you meet him is his charm. He's sweet, he is always smiling, always cracking a joke. And when I met him, he touched my life in significant ways. He literally moved me from my then career trajectory of ICTs for development and gender to evaluation and gender. And since then, the story has not changed. After we met him in 2004 at a workshop, when we met him, he was talking about what he called community scorecards. There is no way you can capture the essence of what development is doing at the community level without storytelling. And as he knows, and as we all know, storytelling is at the heart of what we do as humans. That's the way we teach younger generations. That's the way we pass on knowledge. The oral tradition of learning and knowing and passing on and teaching and training and verifying and observing is the oldest one. When new forms came on and writing took on the stage, it seemed as if oral ways of transferring information and knowledge were, in a sense, inferior. And yet that is not the case. So I'm saying for us today, when we're thinking about writing and where we move forward in terms of sharing with the rest of the world, we who still have this rich oral tradition mustn't forget it. And even a scholarly piece like the journal that we're putting together, this volume, can reenact one of these ways that we bring to the world, that we share with the rest of the world as Africans. And not just Africans. We know that when this idea started, Sulley started this idea of Made in African Evaluation, which is now the current tag and title. He asked a question, or the essence of it was how to make evaluation our own. In those 4 words are very deep, deep values. He did not say make it African. He said our own. So the context is everywhere. Our own, meaning that we cannot superimpose other knowledges on top of what we have and call that ours. And in using our knowledge, we must mix in other knowledges to come to the present. So technically speaking, in those 4 words, making evaluation our own, Sulley gave us not just a challenge as an evaluation community, but he also perhaps made, as Mark has referred to, a rebuke of what we were doing as a community of practitioners. But finally, that, perhaps more, also had inherent in those 4 words, advice. And this is where we start this story about what to write and how to write. My invitation, as Sulley would say, is that you consider telling a story around his life, perhaps. As Mark has said, maybe you would have 1 or 2 things about him, but maybe not. But this story must not just look back, but come to the present and look to the future. What would Sulley have liked for us to be like in another 10, 20, 30, possibly 50 years from now, as a community of evaluators, as members of the community, of a global community from all over the world, contributing to development? As Mark has said, he was not only an African, but he was also Canadian. And this is becoming the global reality. We are all moving around in such great numbers and so in such fluid ways that ultimately we must, at some point in time, raise solutions for the poly crisis that now affect us. I just want to end by saying that where we are today is the present in terms of this reality of Made in Africa evaluation, which I directly link to Sulley's thinking and Sulley's challenge to us as a community. We need to see and use the resources that have already been put together. And in this regard, I refer to 2 recent volumes, journal volumes, the AHA journal volume on the Made in Africa Evaluation, Volume 19, and the current Journal of Multidisciplinary Evaluation that was done in collaboration with the International Evaluation Academy. Those are sources, great sources, where you can start with a contemporary, because Sulley was not only scholarly and theoretical, but he was also very practical. Anybody would understand him if you listened to him. So he doesn't want us creating castles in the air, but we should also have feet on the ground and create techniques, tools, methods, conversations, and stories that would speak to a great variety of people wherever they're located in society. So I invite you all to think about putting together an oral story. I refer to one oral story of the independent evaluation group that was done, including, we have Robert Picciotto, who had a contribution to the journal, to one of the journals I mentioned, the other journal, the JMT.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Clarence.
So, yes, so I think I will rest my case here, talking about oral history, and I hand over to Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Florence, for elaborating on that particular concept. So if you have any thoughts, you can drop it in the chat box, or you can leave a question for later. Our next panelist is Eda Kanini. Just let me introduce Eda before I ask the questions. She's a multifaceted consultant in organizational development. She holds several leadership and management positions, including a founding member of the Consultancy for Organizational Development and Research. She's the current treasurer of AGDIN, and the secretary of MEPAC, and on the current board of FRIA. And she's the Sub-Saharan Africa representative in ideas, and Eda has a passion for passing her knowledge on to others, and that's why she's been invited to be our guest editor, and to share one aspect of Sulley that we knew. Now, Sulley was an advisor to the highest office in his country. He was an advisor to the president at one point. He engaged politicians around matters of politics, so he was a politician as part of his life, a large part of his life, in fact, and he was able to engage politicians in the let's call it the relative usefulness of evaluation, how they should consider evaluation. It's through his efforts that we now have, as part of our FRIA, parliamentarians as part of discussing evaluations. So he brought evaluations into politics and asked ministries within political parties to consider evaluations. So Eda, based on your information and insights, how should authors thinking about letting politics and evaluation meet, how should they consider proceeding in writing about the lessons we can learn from infusing evaluation into politics and policy making in particular, and how would that be in line with what Sulley stood for? So Eda, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, and thank you, Florence, for the very good start. In fact, the flow is very good. And as you said, Mark, Sulley did things in a very effortless way, in a challenging ground, or like the political state is quite a challenging concept, and having dealt with politicians, with Florence here in Kenya. So Sulley served as a presidential advisor, as you said, at one time, as 2009 to 2017, a high commissioner. And what I would say we really need to come out is how he used that opportunity presented to him. At one time, I know Sulley mentored new political candidates who are coming in place. So for me, I think he was asking himself, to what end am I doing this? Because it's not easy to mentor politicians, and especially new political candidates. So for him, he wanted to see them serve the citizens in a good way, and make impact and have good outcome and change the lives of the citizens. But at the same time, what was really interesting is that Gariba mentored these politicians in an equitable way, all the parties across. As a human being, I'm sure he had maybe a political party that he would have he loved or would have supported, but this did not come out in his work. He did it equitably, brought all the new politicians on board, mentored them how to serve the citizens. So I would love to see this also come out on how he did things in an effortless way. Florence mentioned something which I'll also point it out here. Sulley really loved more action and less talk. Even he became a commentator on TV, he became a commentator on radio. It's something that a person would not really think of doing, but because he wanted really to articulate the value of evaluation and the impact of embracing evaluation in the political space. He used the opportunity he had to establish more monitoring and evaluation units in departments in his country. And we can see how passionate he was in taking evaluation to higher to that higher space. Therefore, for me, what I would really want to come out as we look at his story, it's to how he really understood evaluation as being inherently political, but at the same time, he was able to balance evaluation as a social construct as well as politically articulated. So it's something that really I would love more people to bring it out as Sulley the politician or Sulley in the political space. That would be my advice in people showing how we can use this opportunity, how we can embrace the opportunity presented to us to reduce asymmetry and to reduce inequity, also in the political space. Otherwise, thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Ada, for sharing those insights, and people are welcome to share some of their thoughts, and we'll engage with their thinking and their developments in that particular area of politics and evaluation. Our next speaker is somebody who's very busy. We dragged her out of a meeting today, but we're happy to have her as one of the guest speakers. Mjiba is known to speak about Made in Africa evaluations. She's a research fellow at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. So the synergy with Sulley is it's very clear. We're talking about Ghanaians here. She's the history and politics sections of the Institute. Mjiba thinks deeply about how to decolonize and re-Africanize knowledge production in Africa. She is engaging in debates, discussions, and we've seen her as part of very many panels, including the picture we had earlier. She was in Cote d'Ivoire during that session. She is the co-principal investigator of Afro-Asian Futures Past, a 30th anniversary early career Andrew Mellon funded project, and she recently released her first film entitled Umoja, Africa Must Unite Now. Now, we're not talking just to an evaluator, but the producer, a filmmaker, and I think we're bringing all kinds of elements together here, and to have such a person as one of our guest editors is very pleasing. So the questions I'm going to ask you, Mjiba, if you can tell us, given this rich kind of call it toolkit you have. One is to use your kind of cognitive sense to think deeply about all the concepts we've used in the past. Now a toolkit of filmmaking is something that boggles my mind. You know, how you can take something that's on pen and paper and make that into a video, something that's visual and can be seen. How we use all of those tools to interrogate again the canons that Sulley spoke about at our conference, how we need to be critical of the things that we've been using and taken for granted. But beyond being critical of those things, what do we use to take forward and build on and then make our own, as Florence said, what do we take forward if we discard what we don't think useful? So do we throw away everything? And how do we bring it back to what Sulley wanted? Mjiba, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, everyone who spoke, and thank you very much for being part of this important special issue. And I have a problem being longer than I am, so I'm going to put my timer on, and if it goes off, just ignore it. I'll stop speaking. So I'm so happy to be here, and I think for me, one of the things that that struck me about Sulley, and then also just this project, right, of Made in Africa evaluation, Mark, I think ties to exactly, what you were asking, this notion of, how do we both interrogate the canons and also have agency, right, as we're engaging with African evaluation. And for me, I think the particularly the 2019 conversation in Abidjan, which is really where I met Sulley. Although I'm at the University of Ghana, I had heard about him, but I had not met him in person. In interacting with him on that panel, and also interacting, in the workshops and following his work, I realized that what's central to his work is this question of African evaluation, or evaluation in Africa having some level of agency, right? Almost divorce, acknowledging sort of the Western evaluation canon, but also divorcing African evaluation from that canon, in sense, acknowledging that African evaluation existed and exists outside of this Western gaze of evaluation. And so for me, I think, as I'm thinking about this special issue, I'm thinking about ensuring that pieces, almost have an intertwined understanding of, both the Western, canon of evaluation, but also acknowledging the agency of evaluation, African evaluation, and evaluation in Africa, and the agency that is rooted in this conversation. One of the things that I think about when I'm thinking about Made in Africa evaluation, it certainly is centering, Africa and promoting African agency in actually ensuring that evaluation is made in Africa. But one of the gaps that I think Sulley would have acknowledged, if he was here with us today, is ensuring that Made in Africa evaluation is simply not porting Western evaluation tools and methods and conducting them in Africa by African people, right? And so I would like to certainly see a critical interrogation of and I don't want to use the word traditional, because I think everything is traditional, but institutions which are not oftentimes recognized as having evaluative properties, or even evaluations, like the Chieftaincy Institution, for example, in Ghana, or other institutions across the continent, and looking at those kinds of institutions and identifying evaluations that take place in those institutions, and perhaps using some lessons from these institutions, which have existed for many years, even before Western evaluation came to the continent, so-called. How was evaluation conducted in the 70s? In the 80s? How is evaluation conducted in spaces where so-called formal evaluations are not occurring? So here's some things that I would really be interested in thinking through. And then also this connection, or the intertwining of class, race, and gender, differences and intersections, right? And how that also impacts evaluation, right? And so when I'm thinking about this question of, connecting, and I have like 28 seconds, but connecting Made in Africa evaluation to evaluative practices that are occurring on the continent across global Africa, which are almost running in parallel to Western evaluation practices in the Western canon. I'm interested in thinking and hearing and reading about these evaluative practices as agents, sorry about that, as African agents, right? So as vehicles, as methods that are coming, you know, organically through African culture, African history, you know, African practices, right? And then lastly, I'll say that I think that it would be interesting for us to think about pushing forward this notion of Made in Africa evaluation to not, you know, to not sort of have a monolithic view of Made in Africa evaluation, but how do we take Made in Africa evaluation and ensure that and it could be regional, it could be local, it could be international, it could even be continental. How do we make it our own in the space in which we're practicing evaluation? And just very lastly, I think it's important for us to push beyond. I see that the cough is coming, right? To push beyond this canon of evaluators being evaluated using a Western model of evaluation, and begin to acknowledge and prop up and even work with institutions on the continent and in global Africa that are conducting evaluations and are training evaluators for the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Njiba. I didn't have to cough there. Another challenge for you as viewers, as listeners, and as contributors, I hope, to this next edition. The last panelist is Jean Providence, or JP as we fondly call him. He's the head of Regional Evaluation Unit at the United Nations World Food Programme in Southern Africa, the regional office in Johannesburg. His interests include pluralistic voices and multiple methodological lenses in evaluation, mixed methods research, inner and outer factors driving behavior change communications, evidence broker for decision-making in public health, education, and other development sectors. Now, that is a mouthful. And the question I have for you, JP, is how do we use these kind of local methodologies that you speak about to generate the kind of evaluation knowledge that we desire? And how would those be in synergy with stuff that Njiba shared with us now and stuff that Sulley Gariba would certainly wanted us to hear from? So over to you, JP.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much, Adam, Njiba, Florence, for actually setting the tone and giving.
Discuss, then let's see whether we can use additional contacts at CDK.
Some feedback there?
Yeah. All right. When we talk about evaluation and when we talk about Sulley Gariba, we see in him an advocate of indigenous evaluation, and indigenous just being native to the land, native to the context, native to the culture, native to the program being evaluated. But how do we then, as evaluators, make sure we are conducting indigenous evaluations, taking into consideration the indigenous knowledge? For example, when a volcano is about to erupt, people living in the neighborhood, in the vicinity of the volcano, they can tell a few days before what is going to happen. How do they know whether the volcano is about to erupt? There are signs, there are symbols, there are signals they keep seeing around that, and then they make sense of what the environment around them is telling them. And Mark, you mentioned actually Sulley Gariba with specific clause. Yeah, even in evaluation, when you go to a community, you can just meet people who have got a specific dressing code, and their dressing code must be revealing. You might not know when you do not come from that particular community, but as evaluators, how do we interpret the dressing code so that we are able to know who is the gatekeeper, who is the knowledge keeper in this particular community? Yeah, and that also translates to informed consent. How do we secure informed consent in a community which is relational? Earlier speakers have mentioned how Africa believes into communal perspectives. Then when it comes to what Gariba was actually trying to achieve and what we want to contribute to is how do we challenge the informed consent so that we accommodate the relational being in that particular community, in that society. I remember having colleagues in one community, they wanted actually to collect data, and they had to dress exactly like the community, because they wanted actually to have that genuine conversation with the community members. And this is very important for us as evaluators. We would like to know, how do we take that into consideration now as we design and challenge current evaluation practices? Yeah, and when we say this, we are not trying to negate or to denigrate Western methods of investigation or evaluation. What we are trying to say is actually, is this relevant to indigenous communities? Is this relevant to Africa? We know there are a lot of knowledge in African communities, and some of them, for example, taboos. That's a word which is known across the board. Every culture has got its own taboos. In some communities in Africa, their taboos, cultural do's and don'ts, do contribute to environmental conservation. If, for example, a particular community cannot touch a specific animal, that animal in their vicinity, in their neighborhood, is going to flourish. That's a form of protecting the environment. How do we then, as evaluators, take that into consideration? Because evaluation, yes, is a sort of relationship. Evaluation is the reflection. Evaluation should actually be that empowering. How do we come with the methodologies which are reflecting that community? And by the way, have we ever, as evaluators, consulted indigenous communities before, during, and after the evaluation? Because these are the people who know what kind of information to collect and how, and by who in the end. We need actually to find methodology to make sure the communication channel, the language we use, is reflective of the community we are interacting with in this in evaluation. We have got these stories. I think Florence mentioned it. And whose stories? How do we tell these stories? Which cultural symbols do we use to design, to conduct, to communicate evaluation results? And when you go, for example, to a particular community, how do we identify ourselves as insider, outsiders? Whichever way, you need actually to know who is going to be your translator, because we do know that when we are translating, sometimes, and some actually scholars have said, translating is a form of betraying the original message. How do we do that? Participatory methods. Let's find creative ways of using and reflecting the cultural richness and the multi-layered knowledge systems in indigenous communities. We are looking forward to that. Thank you so much. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you, JP. I was just about to cough there.
Right.
Thank you to the panelists for sharing I guess, the kind of spaces and places that we want to interrogate for this edition. A very interesting kind of thought pieces there, and different angles we can look at this whole the same concept that we're trying to delve into now. We now have some space for questions, suggestions, and reflections. If you're going to ask a question, please just raise your hand, and I'm between myself and Nicola, we'll try to identify you and see how we can allow you to share your questions. I've had the opportunity to read some of the comments there. Thank you, Nancy, for those interesting comments. Very insightful. Good to see you again also. Are there any individuals who would like to ask a question, maybe about a particular thing that they want to share, you want to share? Ms. Nancy wants to say something. Do you want to use your camera, Nancy, and share with us?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Mark, and really wonderful to see all of you again and to see this continuing. And I was reflecting as I was listening to Florence and the other speakers and Mark, thinking back, and Ted, I think, who's on the call, will remember this too. Sulley's journey of starting in 2001 around rethinking, reshaping, and reforming evaluation. And I think that was that's also a very good tagline. But I think for those of you that were around at that stage, I don't think Sulley and the rest of us had any idea how hard it was going to be structurally. And my question to all of you is, do we have a clear sense? And I would encourage you to have a focus in the journal article on this as well. Do we have a clear sense of the structural changes that are needed to genuinely shift our field to valuing Indigenous knowledge, to valuing a Made in Africa frame? And I remember Sulley always pushing us to, and we've tried to, probably not as eloquently, but carry this on at MasterCard, always encouraging us to be in the game, be at those tables that are discussing the power shifts, and push for the power shifts. Be fearless about it. Stand up, even if your organization is lukewarm on the idea. So it's are we in the game? And what are the structural changes that are needed? And let's focus on those, and let's really get serious about the rethinking, reshaping, reforming agenda. Certainly the passion is there, the spirit is there, and these kinds of initiatives exist. But let's really make this next decade the focus of action that Sulley wanted to see. We know what needs to change. Now let's just identify it and get in there.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks for that. Is there Serge's hand? Let's see. How are we doing?
Thank you, Mark. Long time. Happy to see you.
Long time. It's been
very long time. Yeah, indeed.
Very long time.
Happy to see so many faces.
Yes.
Really, indeed, this is my first time really to get engaged in a discussion about our passing, I might say, warrior. You know, Sulley Gariba was a warrior. It's not like a simple man. And I'm so happy to see that we see a lot of energy, a lot of attentions about his achievements. I have also to acknowledge that my leadership started with Sulley Gariba. You know, when I met him in Carleton, in Ottawa, 2013, and he shaped my way to see leadership in the way. And then we used to do a lot of work, you know, let's say off ground, to get the affair office be established in Accra. Many people don't know that. That's why after the launch of the office, we get this wonderful visit to his home in Accra. That was very, very insightful. Another issue people don't know is like Sulley Gariba was not, is not someone who will show flag. He worked on the ground, on the ball. So we do so many, let's say, mentorship, not only for junior evaluators, but also even for elders. We're doing so many things based on his great experience as a diplomatic person. He was ambassador for Ghana in Canada. And then as evaluator, he do a lot of evaluation, many books. We don't have to come back on that. But anyway, but to come back to how the big question for me, for all people here is that how can we move forward with all those achievements? To do things on the way that we see a transformation. Basically, within AFREA, because for Sulley Gariba, AFREA was supposed to be like a key driver of the evaluation functions in Africa. And he put a lot of energy, a lot of hopes on this lovely association. So we are standing on the board and then on the way. We have to think about how we can make this a reality. How can we better shift the way, shift the policy on the board, not only for the journal, but how we can get this reality to see AFREA because standing as a key support of evaluation functions. Regarding existing evaluations, we are the evaluation engineers because I'm also the co-chair of evaluation engineers. We start something very, very important because evaluation engineers as a global evaluation networks established in 2017 in Bishkek under EvalPartners umbrella. We recently completed ethical protocol for evaluation, for induced evaluation in Africa. Thank you, Ponge. I think Ponge is online. This was a good job completed by our friends in Africa, led on the leadership of Ponge, with a number of case studies. So we come up with the ethical principle to guide these kind of works. And then John Providence, I was happy to listen to your story. And he also kept and met what we're doing at the evaluation engineers. I think if you get a good use of the ethical protocol we completed, many things will change because there are a lot of things, a lot of evaluations we have to see beyond the OECD and let's say classical criteria we see in the evaluations. No, there are so many criteria we can develop with indigenous views to make things be completed differently. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, colleagues. This is what I want to share.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. I hope again.
Let's do some work together on this. Okay. We know people have limited time. We have one more hand that I recognize, Adeline. Adeline is past president, who was also on that picture that we showed earlier.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to your team. And it's good to see that this edition is going ahead, and just the excitement that is gathering around this is really great. And thank you to all the speakers. And I like the way you were, just bringing out some of the focus areas. And I know, Mark, we've had this discussion around let's have practical application. People starting to write how are they, using the Made in Africa evaluation. I just wanted to highlight one area which I feel like maybe was not emphasized by the panelists, and I'm wondering whether it's something that you can seriously consider. And this is around young people. I know that AFREA is the young and emerging evaluators that are really active and doing some evaluations. And this is where most of the innovation around Made in Africa evaluation is taking place. Just to say, how can we ensure that we encourage those young people to be key contributors to this edition, and also maybe if there's need for mentorship to make sure that their articles are published. Thank you.
Good point. Excellent. Thanks for reminding us. And maybe I indicated something about the future, but it's not us giving the future, it's making sure that the future is part of the future. No, not us doing that, but getting the young emerging evaluators to generate that future themselves. Excellent point. Thanks for that. Nicola?
I see that we are running out of time. We're already a little bit over time, but there are still two hands around. Give people an opportunity. If you want to drop off, the webinar was initially scheduled only for an hour, but if you want to stay on, it seems like there's so many rich thoughts and reflections. So there are two more hands raised, and perhaps we can have those two hands and then wrap it up.
Okay. So who are the two hands you saw first?
Daniel and Florence.
Okay, so Florence can wait for the wrap up. Daniel first.
Thank you. Just a quick observation, really. I've been working a lot with Eval Indigenous recently, along with Dr. Pongwe and others. And my reading of it all is I see the Made in Africa very much as a political movement. I see it as relating very much to what Amilcar Cabral talked about, which is the role of indigenous culture in national liberation movements, and how the function of knowledge was to liberate. So in relation to the issues around politics and issues raised about indigenous institutions, whether they're national or local level, the methodologies are there. They've been there for centuries. You know, as Florence was talking about storytelling and oral histories and how people kind of generate and communicate and use knowledge, make decisions. To me, it's the movement in order to mature, if you like. Made in Africa is very much, I'm not talking about a national liberation struggle, but I'm not talking about a repeat of the liberation movements in the 50s and 60s. But I do see it as a very political issue, and I don't see it necessarily as one of needing to have unity between North and South. I see it sometimes as being necessarily divisive or pushing back against those canons, if you like, and gathering momentum and the joining of hands, North and South, across to collaborate together as a movement. So I don't see it in an academic sense as one of methodology on participatory this. I think we make it desperately complicated for the layperson to understand what the hell we're talking about some of the time. Developmental evaluation, all these prefixes that confuse. I think it is about giving agency to people who've been doing this for centuries, who've been doing it, who've not been shot at by Western canons, and giving them a space and giving them an opportunity, because they do really important evaluation work, although they probably wouldn't call it evaluation in the sense that we talk about. So I do see, you know, the issues around the political economy of it as pretty critical, and how, you know, I remember talking to John and Jovu about issues to do with people who've become socialized, I use my words carefully, by the West, dependency on money, for example, in terms of who's in charge of what agenda, who decides what is evaluated, and so on and so forth. So it is about the politics and the kind of imbalance of power relations and the need for some structural change. There are very good reasons why there's a need for made-in evaluation. A lot of that is because of the behaviors and decisions made by current institutions that have proliferated around the globe and across continents. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the kind of writing we want on paper, and we can share it with the broader audience. Are you talking about the disruptive nature of evaluation and what we should do? And Nicola, as a closing exercise, if you can just ask each of the panelists to have the last word and say, we welcome X from the participants as a writer. We will start with Florence. What is it that you invite writers to do? Please spotlight Florence.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for this opportunity to once again wade into this. I want to just say that I like what Nancy, the challenge she said, taking us back to the beginning of this century, 2001, and to say we did not envisage that this was going to be so hard. That is true. And the reason for this being hard is, in a sense, linked to what, sorry, so okay. The reason—
We have 1 minute. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Reason is because we're forgetting that this disruption that is happening now, we're trying to fight against colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, and modernization, all of which are linked in a sense and have brought us to this polycrisis situation. This is over 700 years of colonization. and we still have not succeeded? Are we trying to disrupt structures of globalization that started only about maybe 30 years ago, on top of all the ones that started with imperialism and colonialism? It's a difficult task. The nicest thing for me to say is that we are in this battle, not just as Africans, but as around the world, we are now connecting. And we have this global platform called Eval Indigenous, where indigenous thinking and thought systems and values are being brought into the global marketplace. Let's link hands and learn from one another and bring our stories all together so we can de-globalize the world and bring values other than Western European norms and standards that still rule the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Florence. I know it's going to be difficult, but we need to appreciate people's time. Eda, please, what do you invite authors to do?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. For me, I know it might look very difficult to start writing, but what I want to tell them, write. There's something to tell about Sulley. You honor him. With that writing, come out. We have a lot of things that we have to write, especially about Africa, for Africa, in terms of evaluation. So let's respect that and do the writing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Mjiba, I hope you're still there.
I am, and I think mine will be really quick.
Yes.
Yes, I would like contributors to be forward-looking and to think about Made in Africa evaluation and African evaluation, not today, but in 5 years and in 10 years, and also to center African agency and to develop, uncover knowledge that has and will be produced through institutions which are not, readily available outside, readily available on the internet or readily available in the Western evaluation canon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. JP, you have some words, last words, invitations?
Thank you so much, Mark. For me, I'll end with a quote by Wole Soyinka. A tiger does not claim his tigritude, he pounces. We have methods, yes. They are there, created by who? Now the challenge or the expectation from the contributors should be about how we co-design evaluations with communities, how we co-implement those evaluations, how we co-analyze and co-disseminate and use results together with the community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you for all the colleagues who put this thing together, made sure that this happened. Now we have the hard work to do. I think when we discussed and we said what questions we're going to have, one question was asked amongst ourselves was, what if we have too many papers? We can't deal with and promise you people, and I said this in our meeting preparing for this, that we would love to have the challenge of having too many papers. We would love to have that challenge. So even though there's a limited number that we can accept for this particular edition, if we have more, we will make a plan, we'll deal with that. But we don't want to have a situation where we don't have enough papers. So the invitation is open. The various categories have been discussed. The essence of Sulley Gariba has been shared with you. We hope that piqued your interest and you will want to contribute and sit down tonight and at least jot down the abstract of what you want to say. And between now and when you do submit the final manuscript in October, one of us will be in touch with you to talk about the abstract and maybe engage with how we see you engaging with that. And if we have and we can assist you, we'll try our best. Or if we can partner you with a mentor to work on that, we'll certainly do that. We will find ways, Adeline, to engage emerging evaluators and to make sure that they contribute to this edition, because they have a voice, they have something to say, and we can build on that. That is something we will do. Thank you for being part of this process, and I will ask Nicola to just close the session.
Well, I'll just formally close because I think you've said everything that needed to be said, Mark. Thank you for everybody, and apologies that we ran a bit over time, but we hope we have as many new additions, as many articles as we've ran over time today. And thank you for everybody, for our panelists, for your constructive thoughts and reflections, and for the audience for excellent comments. And we just want to say thanks for participating, and we look forward to having a 2 volumes of the journal. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.